Hello, it's me, it's Opal, and for my next slideshow, I will be discussing poverty and inequality or communities at risk in housing. So, for my first slide, it will be talking about quick facts about the micro, meso, and macro for, inequalities that are happening at this level. At a micro level, inequality affects individuals by limiting access to rights and opportunities. For example, Black codes restricted freedoms and created long-term disadvantages for African Americans. At the meso level, communities have historically built resilience through mutual aid and collective support systems. At a macro level, social work developed alongside major reform movements addressing poverty, labor conditions, and civil rights. These examples show that social problems exist at multiple levels and require different types of interventions. Understanding all three levels is important for creating a meaningful and lasting change. For my next slide, impact of poverty. Poverty impacts individuals across the entire lifespan, affecting development, opportunities, and quality of life. In childhood, poverty can limit access to education, nutrition, and stable housing, which affects long-term development. In adulthood, it can lead to unstable employment, housing insecurity, and poor health outcomes. In later in life, poverty increases dependency on limited support systems and resources. Research shows that empathy helps social workers better understand these lived experiences and respond effectively to clients' needs. Poverty is not just individual issues, it's shaped by conditions and systemic inequality. For my next slide, policy and housing inequality, codes and Jim Crow laws are key examples of policies that create long-term poverty and housing disparities. These laws were introduced during the Reconstruction when the U.S. was trying to rebuild after the Civil War. However, many groups resisted equality and created laws to maintain racial hierarchy. These policies restricted access to housing, jobs, and basic rights, creating generational inequality. The effects of these systems can still be seen today in housing disparities and economic inequality. This shows how policy decisions can have long lasting impacts on communities. For my next slide, advocacy levels. Advocacy, advocacy can occur at multiple levels depending on issues being addressed. At a local level, social workers can connect individuals to housing, food, and community resources. At a state level, they can advocate for policies that improve access to services like healthcare and education. At the national level, they can support laws that address poverty and inequality more broadly. I would focus most on meso and macro advocacy because poverty is deeply rooted in systemic issues. Research shows that inequality is shaped by larger social structures, not just individual choices. For my last slide, ethical principles, social justices, the ethical principle that best aligns with modules 5 and 6 is social justice. These modules focus on poverty, inequality, and housing disparities, which are all issues related to unequal access to resources and opportunities. The NASW Code of Ethics explains that it guides social workers in making decisions that promote fairness and addresses social problems. Social justice emphasizes advocating for the vulnerable and marginalized populations. This principle is important because it pushes social workers to challenge systems that create inequality. Overall, social justice is central to addressing the issue discussed in these modules. And these are my references that I used. Thank you once again for joining me and have a good one.